And we're live now. We're live.
We're live. We're live. Three Ball Walk, new show.
I know, it's a brand new show. I'm Bob. This is
Julio.
I'm Eddie.
And Eddie, and we're the show that talks about the great game of baseball. Maybe not used to what you're normally seeing. We don't focus only on the major leagues, but all aspects of the national pastime. And today we're going to talk about, with April 15th approaching, the 69th anniversary. We're talking about Jackie Robinson today. April 15th is coming up, so you got to get your taxes. Well, I guess
April 18th,
April 18th
because it's Emancipation Day in the city of Washington. So everything's shut down in Washington.
So you can wait till past the last minute this year.
Monday.
But this year, Jackie Robinson, his 69th anniversary, and of course this week, Ken Burns had his wonderful documentary on PBS about Jackie Robinson. And guys, I guess the first thing to ask is, when you hear the word Jackie Robinson, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
A trendsetter and a changer of the game. I think it's one of those things where you can sit back and look, and I think, you know, the one thing that gets me the most oftentimes about Jackie Robinson is, as much as, yes, broke the color barrier and all that kind of stuff, and I actually think that does him an injustice, because, and I'll give you the only other thing I can really compare it to is Cal Ripken's streak, because Cal Ripken's streak takes away from the great baseball player that Cal Ripken was. Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier takes away from the impact on the field that Jackie Robinson did.
So if Jackie Robinson had not been the first and had come along 10 years later, he'd still be in the Hall of Fame.
He would be known as one of the greatest leadoff, you know, one of the latest run scorers, base runners, hitters.
And maybe the greatest utility player of all time, because he played 4 different positions. You know, he played first, second, third, and outfield. And that's something I think that's lost, and especially towards the end of his career. You know, he played when he couldn't be just a second baseman any longer. Walter Alston found places for him to play because they had to have him in the lineup.
And I think part of that is none of us are 69 years old. Some of us might look 69, but we're not 69 years old. So, you know, part of what we experience of the Jackie Robinson stuff is passed down from our dads, from our granddads, from stuff that we have read, from things that come as a part of history more so than having lived it out. So I think that's one thing we need to say up front, is that what we're talking about watching it from removed by 69
Absolutely.
years. And so whatever we say about that, remember that we're removed from it.
And a lot of it too is growing up, you know, being born, I think all of us pretty much right there, 1960, 61, growing up in the 60s, early 70s, all the civil rights movement, everything about Jackie Robinson was the historical stuff from the color barrier stuff. It wasn't the baseball things that were mentioned.
In the 8th grade, you know, he passed away in 1972, and in the 8th grade, I did a book report. I read it, I never had it made, and while I don't remember, I need to reread that book, but I remember reading that book, and I don't remember focusing so much on his baseball career as maybe things after baseball, but
and that's later on in his life. That's what became important to him.
Right.
I mean, and that's why it was talked, because that's what he wanted to talk about.
But you think about a guy who, I don't know that the youth of America today can relate or have any idea of what he must have gone through. I mean, he couldn't eat at the same hotels or stay in the same hotels. You know, they built Dodgertown basically because they brought black players in, and starting with Jackie Robinson.
Well, it was interesting, and I think one of the things that in the 1942 movie, I think they do, it's based on, or a 42 movie, not 1942. 1961 is a movie, or no, 61 is a movie, and 42 is a movie. But, you know, and they're all 19, no, none of them were 19. No. One of them's a uniform number, and the other one's a number of home runs.
Exactly.
But it's all about that year. It's all about 1947. And I think one of the interesting things that I remember my father telling me was 1946. And 1946 is the year he actually signed and played and wound up spending the year in Montreal. And that year, the Dodgers didn't have Dodgertown.
No.
The Dodgers, and what you see about them, where is it they go to no, in 46 they did. In 47 they were in Sanford. They were in Sanford. And the whole thing there where they found a house for him, and that's what comes out in the movie. But in 1946, the Dodgers decided they left the United States altogether and had spring training in Havana, because Cuba was one of the few places where they could get one hotel for the whole team. They could all practice together. And even though the intentions were to send him to AAA, that whole spring training he spent with the Dodgers, and there was no segregation because Cuba was that.
Well, that makes a big point of it, because they were preparing their team for what was going to come the next year. Mm-hmm. You know, we sit so removed from that, because when I grew up, some of my best friends were African American athletes, and I didn't think of them as black, even though it was a civil rights era in '72 and going to high school in '76, and you know the movies that have come out about that, and there was certainly racial tensions in Birmingham, Alabama, where I grew up in the 1970s. Believe me, they were still there. But among those of us who were athletes, it didn't matter.
Right.
It was just a teammate, and I think at some point they had to have that experience. And going to Havana the year before, let them have that experience. And for some guys, remember now, there are guys on that team who are from the South. There are guys who are on that team who probably still held on to some of those values, and they had to work through that.
But if that would have happened the year before, there would have been more. And I think 1946 prepared a lot of those players for it by letting them have spring training together.
And see, this guy's a great ball player. It didn't matter what color it was. He's a great ball player.
Right. And the one thing they talk about, you know, in 42 and in the documentary that just came out is the number of players who, you know, came up with a petition that we don't want, you know, we want to keep the Brooklyn Dodgers white, and and Leo DeRocher put the kibosh on that immediately, but they still traded off, you know, Kirby Higbee at the beginning of the year, and Dixie Walker, who was a very popular player with the Dodgers. They dealt him at the end of the year to Pittsburgh as well. So I mean, the thing about Robinson to me is, and I said this a few minutes ago, was he did it by himself. Not exactly. He had his wife. And I don't think that can be overemphasized enough, the fact that he did have Rachel Robinson with him. And you've met her before, right?
I had the pleasure when I was the PR director for the Dodgers. I had, I want to say, late summer 2000, the U.S. Post Office, the Postal Service came out with a series of stamps based on a bunch of.
I have
you have that. You have the sheet with all the different players, and
how much is that worth, by the way?
$10. I don't know what the stamps are worth. I'm not talking about. Hey, to me, it's worth a lot. I have the.
All right, so you heard it there, folks. $10 for $10 or $10.
Come on,
Home Court Sports.
And I have the envelopes too. Babe Ruth and Jackie Robinson. I think
of all the different ones.
I think most of them.
They decided out of all the stamps, and for the set, the post office always does the first day issues, and they decided where they wanted to do the first day issue for that stamp series. Was have it postmarked Dodger Stadium, Los Angeles, California, and working with the post office and the postmaster and people there, we set up a press conference and a little show. It was about probably right before or right after batting practice, about 5 in the afternoon, 5:30 in the afternoon, pregame show. Rachel Robinson spoke, along with the whole family was there, and they presented her with the whole thing. And it was really, and then during the game in the lobby, they had postal workers working there in big lines so you could get an envelope or a stamp with the first day cancellation. And I had the pleasure, nothing to do from Mrs. Robinson, you know, afterwards, but I wound up getting a plaque with the stamp, and it's canceled, real nice plaque, with a little plaque at the bottom. Julio Sarmiento, thank you very much for all you and the Los Angeles Dodgers did, and I forget his name now, and it's signed the Postmaster, Los Angeles, California.
That's really cool.
And it was neat, and she just a total class act, and kind of going through the same thing, and not, you know, change the subject a little bit about players that went through a lot, and you go through that color barrier. I think in the 60s, a lot of the things that kind of gets mistaken is, and I always say, because it was part of my upbringing as well, is breaking the language barrier. And you get all these players coming from Puerto Rico, Cuba, Dominican Republic, and whatever, and it's a struggle, and the only reason I thought of that is another lady, and I mean class act, that I had the pleasure of meeting was Vera Clemente, and again, I think we look at baseball players and everything, and we don't think of what's behind them at home when they go home every single day. And I think there's two wives that their husbands did so much to change the atmosphere of the game and the game we love. that people sometimes don't give him enough credit.
Yeah, you definitely don't think about it now. I mean, as much. We don't. For me, for instance, I don't look at a baseball player and go, he's white or he's black or he's Puerto Rican or he's Cuban. I look at him and can he hit? Can he throw? Can he run? Can he help my team that I want to win? Or if I'm a fantasy baseball guy, which I'm not, I hate fantasy baseball. It's another story for another day. But can he help me in that process?
Right.
And so it's about production, I think, now. But we have to remember, 69 years have passed.
Right.
And we still are not quite there yet.
The one thing that was interesting, and I've read and watched Ken Burns' baseball video or any number of videos, is the fact when Robinson came to the Dodgers, you know, he brought a different style of baseball completely. You know, in his career, he's stole home 18 times. I mean, I don't think people stole home 18 times in the last 69 years. I mean, it's ridiculous. He brought.
How about Ty Cobb 54?
Well, there you go. But we're talking
about him later.
Talk about him later. That's another show. But I mean, you look at what he did, the way he would cause pitchers to throw air balls over, balks. I mean,
you're disrupting the game. You're disrupting the game. Disrupting the game completely. And that game had been played in the Negro League.
Completely.
And you know, you look at and I still say one of the interesting things. I read a book when I was a kid.
Only one.
That's all. It took me a long time. But you read a book and all of a sudden it builds up, especially at that age. You know, I remember reading from Ghetto to Glory, Bob Gibbs, the story, and that's what sold me on Bob Gibson. I mean, and you just, it means so much more because you don't have that many other things interfering. But read a book about Satchel Paige, and I have always wanted to know, and something we'll never know, what would Satchel Paige have done had he been in the major leagues that whole time?
Well, you know,
oh my!
What's interesting?
What would a lot of those players
guys would have
done had they
Josh
been
Gibson.
in the league?
I mean, but Paige, Paige thought he was going to be the first, and he was upset he wasn't the first because there was 2 or 3 guys they talked. Monty Irvin, of course, who I was lucky enough to meet one time, was the guy they thought would be the first one. And then there was a guy that I didn't realize this until I saw the video the other night, Sam Jethro, who was an outfielder for the Braves eventually. But when Ricky decided to choose Robinson, and this is something we get more into in the next segment, you know, he looked at who he was as a person. Because he was 26 when he came to
UCLA graduate,
first 4
military vet. He was already a veteran from Korea.
And I think
World War II.
I think
it was World War II.
I think that makes a huge difference in choosing the person, because you had to have somebody who could handle it. You had to have somebody who was passionate about, but you also had to have somebody who was really good at baseball.
No,
you could not have somebody that was a sideshow or some PR publicity stunt. It had to be somebody who could help the Dodgers win and could handle the New York media and all the racial pressures that was going to
And I think part of it, and I don't want to belittle it, but with the racial pressures and everything like that, yes, that's obviously there and everything, but I think baseball in itself, because of the way, the good old boy and you're a fan of a team and everything, that brings pressures on themselves. And people look at Jackie Robinson, it was a lot of racial pressures breaking it, or Hank Aaron in 1974 getting all the hate mail and everything like that.
I think that's a little different too. We'll talk about that in the next
But Roger Maris didn't have it easy in 1961 either.
Not at all.
And I think it's just, people this is my game, this is the way I like it, and this is the way it should stay. And I think it makes an impact on who you're going to allow in and what records you're going to allow to be broken and everything like that. And on what you were saying, it's interesting. They had to get the right player. It wasn't only him. And I think I was looking somewhere that if you were an African American player in the 1940s and 50s in the major leagues, you were a star.
Absolutely.
Because if you were a marginal player, bench player, whatever, it wasn't worth taking the risk to do it.
The bench was
You were the Willie Mays. You were the Bill. You were the Dick. You were,
You had to be better.
The Don Newcombs.
You truthfully had to be better than every other white guy at the position.
That's right.
Just to be honest with it, because you could not afford to cause that kind of distractions, even among teammates in those early eras. So you had to be better.
And the best one, obviously, they felt was Jackie Robinson. And that's what we're talking about today. 3-ball walk. We're taking our first break, and we'll be back for the second part of today's segment And whenever you hit the play button on your computer or whatever, find us right there.
Play ball.
See you.